The forest hung heavy with an eerie silence, the last remnants of daylight filtering weakly through the dense canopy, casting long shadows over the earth strewn with fallen leaves. Hunter, a massive mastiff marked by scars, his amber eyes glowing with a desperate resolve, limped through the underbrush. His once bulging muscles had withered to nothing, the result of days spent without sustenance. His ribs jutted out sharply beneath his matted fur, a stark reminder of the brutality of survival in solitude. His senses, sharpened by hunger and necessity, remained alert, every rustle of leaves, every slight motion stoking the flicker of hope that something, anything, might relieve the gnawing emptiness in his belly. But the forest, unforgiving as ever, had offered nothing. As he trudged on, a new scent drifted to him. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the forest's earthy fragrance, but grew stronger with each step. It wasn't the familiar odor of prey, but something else, alive, foreign, and yet unmistakably so. Hunter paused, his ears flicking, nostrils flaring, searching for the source. Then, soft as a whisper on the wind, he heard it, a cry, high-pitched, plaintive, filled with a vulnerability that tugged at something deep within him, something primal. Hunter moved cautiously, his massive body low to the ground, every muscle taut, every sense on high alert. His amber eyes scanned the surroundings, scanning for any danger, but the only sound was the cry, growing louder, more urgent. The forest opened into a small clearing, and there, tucked beneath the sprawling roots of a massive oak, lay the source of the noise, a baby. Wrapped in a tattered, mud-streaked blanket, the infant's tiny fists flailed weakly as it wailed against the encroaching darkness. Hunter froze, his gaze locked on the child. Conflicting instincts surged through him in a violent rush. Hunger screamed at him to turn away, to leave the fragile creature to its fate. But another, deeper instinct, one he couldn't explain, yet couldn't deny, anchored him to the spot. With cautious deliberation, Hunter took a step forward, his massive paws crunching softly against the dry, fallen leaves. The baby's cries faltered, as if the tiny thing had sensed his presence. Hunter's nose twitched, and his head tilted in curiosity. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, amber eyes wide with uncertainty. Then, against all odds, he did the unthinkable. He lay down beside the baby, his massive body curling protectively around the fragile form. The warmth of the infant's tiny body pressed against him sparked something inside of him, something akin to purpose. A low, comforting whine escaped his throat, the hunger that had driven him so relentlessly forgotten for the moment. The wild dog, shaped by years of survival and battle, had chosen to guard this most vulnerable of creatures. As the night deepened, the forest grew colder. A biting wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the distant howls of unseen predators. Despite his exhaustion, Hunter remained vigilant, his body shielding the baby from the night's chill. The infant's cries had quieted to soft whimpers, its chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. Hunter's amber eyes scanned the surrounding darkness, ears flicking at every subtle sound. He knew the forest was merciless, an expanse where the strong survived and the weak perished. But tonight, something had changed. He wasn't just fighting to stay alive anymore. He was guarding something far more fragile than himself. The baby stirred, releasing a faint sound, and Hunter lowered his massive head, sniffing at the bundle. The child's scent was strange, unfamiliar, a mix of earth, cloth, and innocence. He nudged the blanket closer, not from understanding, but from instinct. A primal, almost unbearable urge to protect overwhelmed everything else. Hunger, fatigue, and pain. Hours slipped by, and the night brought fresh challenges. A rustle from the nearby bushes caught Hunter's attention. His ears pricked, his body tensed, and he positioned himself between the baby and the potential threat. From the shadows emerged a pair of glowing eyes, followed by the low, guttural growl of a wolf. Then another set of eyes. Then another. A pack had surrounded the clearing, their movements calculated and predatory. Hunter stood firm, his growls rising in warning, his body a barricade between the infant and the wolves. They circled, testing his resolve, but Hunter did not waver. Outnumbered, weakened, he stood his ground. One wolf lunged, its teeth aiming for Hunter's flank. With a feral snarl, Hunter twisted, meeting the attacker head-on. His jaws clamped down on the wolf's shoulder, forcing it to retreat with a sharp yelp. Another wolf darted in, this time from the side, but Hunter swiped at it with a powerful paw, sending it crashing into the underbrush. The fight was fierce, over in moments. Hunter's body moved in a blur as he defended his charge, blood staining his fur, his breathing heavy, his legs trembling from the effort. At last, after what seemed like an eternity, the wolves relented. One by one, they slunk away, their eyes disappearing into the dark like fading embers. Hunter stood, panting, his body covered in scratches and bites, his head hanging low, exhaustion weighing on him. But his resolve, that unspoken promise, remained intact. Turning back to the baby, he nudged it gently, his warm breath brushing against the infant's cheek. The child stirred slightly, a faint noise escaping its lips, almost like a whisper of gratitude. The night wore on, and the bond between the dog and the child grew stronger. Hunter knew they couldn't stay exposed much longer. He needed to find shelter, somewhere safe, where he could guard the baby without fear of constant attack. With a soft whine, he carefully gripped the edge of the baby's blanket in his teeth, lifting it with utmost gentleness. Every step was slow and deliberate, his body battered, but his determination unwavering. He caught the faint scent of water on the breeze and followed it, hoping for a place to rest, to recover. The forest opened into a small stream, its water shimmering beneath the moonlight. Hunter set the baby down on a soft patch of moss, his amber eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. He drank deeply from the stream, quenching his thirst before returning to the infant. With delicate care, he nudged the blanket closer to the water's edge, licking the baby's lips in an attempt to revive it. The child stirred, its tiny hand twitching, sensing the cool moisture. Hunter let out a soft, contented whine. Against all odds, the baby was holding on. For a moment, the stream offered respite, but Hunter knew they couldn't linger. The forest was no place for the vulnerable. His sharp eyes caught sight of something distant, a crumbling structure half hidden by vines and shadows. A cabin. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. With renewed resolve, Hunter picked up the baby and began the journey toward it, each step slow but steady. The path was grueling, the burden of the infant far heavier than its weight. But it wasn't the child's size that made the journey harder. It was the responsibility, the crushing need to protect the fragile life in his care. The wind rustled the trees, and the distant calls of owls echoed through the night, but Hunter pressed on. When they finally reached the cabin, it was a sad, decaying structure. The roof sagged, the walls cracked and weathered. Broken windows let the moonlight spill through, casting the room in eerie silver. To Hunter, it wasn't a ruin. It was a sanctuary. He pushed the door open with his nose, the old wood creaking in protest. Inside, the air was stale but dry. The ground was dusty, littered with debris. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Hunter carefully stepped over the threshold, his paws leaving faint prints in the dust as he moved to a corner where the drafts were less harsh. Gently, he placed the baby on a patch of dry earth, nudging the blanket around it to keep it warm. The infant stirred, curling its fingers around the fabric. Hunter watched, his amber eyes softening at the sight. For a moment, he allowed himself to rest, lowering his body to the floor, wrapping himself around the child in a protective embrace. His breathing slowed, the steady rise and fall of his chest lulling the baby into a peaceful sleep. But his rest was short-lived. A faint sound outside, a rustle that didn't belong to the wind. Hunter rose slowly, his muscles tight with tension, ears straining to catch any further movement. The forest had grown unnervingly still. Then, a low growl vibrated through the cabin. Hunter's hackles rose, and he stood tall, ready for whatever came next. Peering through the broken window, he saw them. Wolves. Their glowing eyes reflected the moonlight, and their scent, sharp and musky, reached him, mingling with the damp earth. The pack had followed him. Hunter was outnumbered, and with each attack he repelled, his strength dwindled. Despite the overwhelming odds, his resolve never faltered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the wolves retreated, bloodied and limping, disappearing into the forest as their glowing eyes faded like embers extinguishing in the night. Hunter stood in the middle of the cabin, his body trembling, breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood matted his fur, and every muscle screamed for rest. But his first thought was for the baby. He limped toward the child, nudging the blanket with his nose. The baby, miraculously unharmed, lay in peaceful sleep, its small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Hunter let out a soft, relieved whine and lowered himself beside the infant, curling his massive body around it. His protective instincts remained on high alert, even as exhaustion weighed heavily on him. The cabin was silent again, save for the faint creaks of the old wooden beams and the steady breathing of the baby. Hunter closed his eyes, though his body remained tense, still too alert to fully relax. He knew this brief respite wouldn't last. The forest was relentless, and the safety of the cabin was temporary. For now, though, they were alive, and that was enough. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the broken windows, casting a soft golden glow across the room. Hunter stirred, his body aching as he rose to his feet. The baby shifted in its sleep, its tiny hands reaching toward the warmth of the morning light. Hunter watched quietly, his amber eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and determination. He knew their journey wasn't over. The forest wouldn't forgive weakness. The baby needed more than just his protection to survive. They needed food, water, and a safe place to stay, somewhere the child could thrive. Hunter's resolve solidified. He would find it, no matter what it took. Outside the cabin, the faint sounds of the forest echoed around him, but he couldn't let his guard down. As the wolves had shown, danger was always lurking, and the cabin, while offering some shelter, was still vulnerable. He couldn't afford to be complacent, and neither could the baby. There was no time to rest. He needed to find food and water. The urgency of the situation pressed on him, but his instincts were clear. No matter the cost, he would ensure their survival. Hunter tipped the bottle slightly, letting a few drops of water fall onto the baby's lips. The baby responded, its mouth instinctively moving to drink. Relief washed over Hunter as he watched, reaffirming his protective instincts. But this was only a temporary solution. They needed more than water. They needed food, shelter, and a plan. The sound of rustling leaves outside the cabin snapped Hunter to attention. His ears perked, and his body tensed as he moved to the door. He sniffed the air, his heart pounding as he recognized the familiar scent of wolves. They hadn't given up. Hunter growled low in his throat, blocking the doorway with his body as his eyes scanned the forest for movement. The wolves were smarter this time, staying hidden among the trees. Hunter could feel their presence, their watchful eyes tracking his every move. They were waiting, testing his resolve. He knew he couldn't afford to let them linger. If they attacked again, his weakened state would leave him at a severe disadvantage. He turned back to the baby, nudging it gently. The child's eyes were wide, sensing the tension. Hunter knew he had to act quickly. Staying in the cabin was no longer an option. They needed to move, to find a safer place where the wolves couldn't follow. But the journey would be dangerous, especially with his injuries slowing him down. Hunter carefully picked up the baby, cradling it gently in its blanket, and stepped outside. His eyes darted to the shadows where the wolves lurked. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he took the first cautious step away from the cabin. The wolves didn't move, but their presence pressed on him like a physical weight. The forest closed in around them as Hunter moved, his pace slow but steady. The baby's warmth against his chest gave him strength, a reminder of why he couldn't give up. Every step felt like a battle, his injured leg protesting with each movement, but he pressed on, his ears swiveling constantly for signs of pursuit. The wolves followed at a distance, their silent presence a constant threat. Hunter's mind raced, searching for a solution. He needed higher ground, a defensible position where he could protect the baby if the wolves attacked again. His amber eyes scanned the forest, seeking anything that might offer an advantage. Finally, he spotted it, a rocky outcrop rising above the dense underbrush. It wasn't much, but it was elevated and surrounded by steep inclines. If he could reach it, he could keep the wolves at bay. Hunter adjusted his grip on the baby and began to climb, his claws scraping against the rough stone as he pulled himself upward. The wolves didn't wait long to react. Their snarls echoed through the forest as they broke from the shadows, their lean bodies darting toward the outcrop. Hunter growled, quickening his pace despite the pain shooting through his limbs. He reached the top just as the first wolf lunged, its jaws snapping inches from his tail. Hunter turned sharply, his body a wall of muscle and determination as he faced the pack. The baby was behind him, safe for now, but the fight was far from over. He let out a fierce bark, the sound reverberating through the forest like thunder. The wolves hesitated, their movements uncertain as they assessed the challenge before them. Hunter knew this was his moment. He couldn't afford to let the wolves gain the upper hand. His protective instincts flared, overriding his exhaustion as he prepared to defend the baby once more. The wolves advanced, their eyes gleaming with hunger. The lead wolf, larger than the others with a patch of silver streaking through its fur, let out a low growl. Hunter didn't flinch. Despite his injuries, his protective instinct surged to the forefront, sharpening his senses and steadying his resolve. He let out a guttural snarl, his teeth bared, ready to defend the baby at all costs. The first wolf lunged, its teeth snapping toward Hunter's throat. He twisted his body, deflecting the attack with a powerful shove of his shoulder. The wolf stumbled, but quickly recovered, circling back to join the others. A second wolf darted in from the side, aiming for Hunter's flank. He reacted with lightning speed, clamping his jaws around the wolf's scruff and tossing it aside. The yelp of pain echoed through the forest, but the pack didn't back down. The lead wolf took a step forward, its eyes locking onto Hunter's. For a moment, there was a silent exchange, a battle of wills. Then, as if on some unspoken signal, the pack attacked in unison. Hunter met them head-on, moving with a grace and precision born of years of survival. Teeth clashed, growls filled the air, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. One wolf managed to clamp its jaws onto Hunter's hind leg, but he twisted violently, throwing it off before it could do serious damage. Another wolf leapt for his throat, but Hunter ducked and countered, his teeth sinking into its shoulder. Despite his fierce defense, the numbers began to take their toll. Hunter's movements grew slower, his breaths more labored. Blood matted his fur, and his legs trembled under the strain. But every time the wolves came close to the baby, he found a surge of strength, a reason to keep fighting. The baby, oblivious to the danger, let out a soft cry from behind him. The sound seemed to pierce the chaos, momentarily halting the wolves' assault. Hunter used the pause to reposition himself, placing the baby in a shallow crevice in the rock where it would be harder for the wolves to reach. He turned back to the pack, his growl deepening as he prepared for another round. The lead wolf growled a command, and the pack advanced again, more cautiously this time. They had underestimated Hunter's determination, but he was relentless. The lead wolf lunged, snapping dangerously close to Hunter's face. He dodged, his movements slower but still precise, and countered with a powerful swipe of his paw. The wolf yelped, blood staining its silver fur, but it didn't back down. The fight raged on, each moment testing Hunter's endurance. His vision blurred, his muscles screamed in protest, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But he refused to falter. Every growl, every bite, every step was a declaration that the baby would survive, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, the faint crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. Hunter's ears perked, and his body tensed as he strained to identify the source. The wolves hesitated, their ears flicking toward the noise, which grew louder and closer. Hunter caught a whiff of something that made his heart race. A human scent. Emerging from the dense underbrush, a figure appeared, a man with a weathered face and a rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes widened at the scene before him. A scarred, bloodied dog standing defiantly between a pack of wolves and what appeared to be a baby hidden in the rocks. The man raised his rifle, aiming it skyward, and a deafening shot rang out. The sound reverberated through the forest like a clap of thunder. The wolves froze, their ears flattening in alarm. Another shot followed, and the pack began to retreat, their snarls fading as they melted back into the shadows of the trees. Hunter stood his ground, his chest heaving as he watched the wolves disappear. The man approached slowly, his rifle lowered but his posture cautious. Hunter growled low in his throat, his body still coiled with tension. He didn't trust humans, not after everything he had endured, but he also knew he couldn't protect the baby alone much longer. The man stopped a few feet away, his eyes softening as he took in the scene. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." Hunter's growl faded slightly, though he kept his stance defensive. The man knelt, setting his rifle aside, and extended a hand. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he murmured. "But you did good. You kept that little one safe." Hunter sniffed the air, his nose twitching as he picked up the man's scent. There was no malice in it, only concern. Slowly, cautiously, Hunter stepped back, allowing the man to approach the crevice where the baby lay. The man reached in carefully, his hands gentle as he lifted the child into his arms. The baby stirred, its cries quieting as it nestled against him. "You're a hero, you know that?" the man said, glancing at Hunter. "You saved this baby's life." Hunter lowered his head, exhaustion finally overtaking him. His legs buckled and he sank to the ground, his body trembling with fatigue. The man moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Hunter's head. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "Let's get you both somewhere safe." As the man carried the baby toward the edge of the forest, Hunter forced himself to his feet. His body swayed, but his resolve was unbroken. He followed them, his steps unsteady but determined. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. The man led the way through the dense forest, his arms cradling the baby as he glanced back to ensure Hunter was following. The dog's steps were slow and labored, each movement a testament to his sheer willpower. Blood streaked his fur, and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes never left the man and the baby. Protecting the child had become his singular purpose, and he wasn't ready to abandon it now. "Hang in there, boy," the man said, his voice low and steady. "We're almost there." The trees began to thin, revealing the faint outline of a cabin nestled in a small clearing. Smoke curled from the chimney, the scent of burning wood mingling with the cool forest air. The sight stirred a flicker of relief in Hunter, though his body remained tense. He had spent too many years on guard, too many days fighting to survive, to let his defenses down now. The man pushed open the cabin door with his shoulder, stepping inside and immediately setting the baby on a worn but clean blanket spread across a couch. The room was simple, yet warm, with the soft glow of a fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Hunter hesitated at the threshold, his body rigid as his eyes scanned the space for potential threats. "Come on in," the man urged, motioning with his hand. "You're safe here." Hunter's paw faltered on the wooden steps, his instincts urging caution even as his body begged for rest. Finally, as if sensing the sincerity in the man's tone, he stepped inside. The warmth of the fire washed over him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, his muscles began to relax. The man knelt in front of him, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and concern. "You're a mess, buddy," he said softly, reaching for a first aid kit on a nearby shelf. Hunter flinched at the movement, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The man paused, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "It's okay. I'm just going to help." Hunter watched him wearily, his body taut with tension. But when the man moved slowly, carefully opening the kit and pulling out a clean cloth, Hunter allowed him to approach. The man dabbed at the wounds on Hunter's shoulder, his touch gentle yet firm. The dog winced but didn't pull away, his eyes locked on the baby resting on the couch. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" the man murmured, his voice more to himself than to Hunter. "But you didn't give up. You saved that little one." Hunter's ears twitched at the man's words. The gentle tone was unfamiliar, but strangely comforting. He lowered his head, his eyes closing briefly as exhaustion weighed him down. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper that broke the quiet. Hunter's head shot up, his body tensing as his gaze snapped to the child. The man chuckled softly. "Relax, boy. I've got it." He moved to the couch, lifting the baby into his arms and cradling it close. The sight of the tiny, fragile life in his care stirred something deep within Hunter, a protective instinct so strong it overshadowed his exhaustion. He rose to his feet, his legs trembling as he stepped closer to the man and the baby. "You're not letting your guard down, are you?" the man said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Well, I can't blame you. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this." The man set the baby down carefully, wrapping it in a thicker blanket before turning back to Hunter. "Let me see if I can find you something to eat," he said, moving toward a small kitchen area. Hunter's ears perked at the word eat, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the baby as if afraid it might disappear if he looked away. The man rummaged through a cupboard, eventually pulling out a can of dog food and a bowl. He set the bowl on the floor and opened the can. The scent of food wafted through the room. "Here you go," the man said, placing the food within reach. "You've earned this." Hunter hesitated, his instincts still wary despite the gnawing hunger in his stomach. Finally, he stepped forward, lowering his head to sniff the food. It wasn't much, but it was enough to quiet the ache in his gut. He ate slowly, his ears flicking at every sound. His gaze darted between the man and the baby as the hours passed. The tension in the cabin began to ease. The man moved carefully, respecting Hunter's space while keeping the fire stoked and the baby warm. Hunter, though still watchful, allowed himself to lie down near the couch. His body curled protectively around the baby's makeshift bed. His eyes never closed fully, his ears twitching at every creak and groan of the old wooden structure. The man settled into a chair nearby, his eyes heavy with thought as he watched the unlikely pair. "You're not just any dog, are you?" he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. "You've got more fight in you than most people I've known." Hunter didn't react, his focus remaining on the baby. But the man's words lingered in the warm air, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of another cold night. But inside the cabin, there was warmth, safety, and the fragile beginnings of trust. Hunter's body began to relax, his breathing steadying as the fire crackled softly in the hearth. For the first time in days, there was peace, a fleeting but precious moment of calm in the chaos of their journey. And as the baby's tiny hand twitched in sleep, Hunter let out a low, contented sigh, his heart swelling with a feeling he hadn't known in years: hope. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, casting streaks of pale gold across the room. Hunter's eyes blinked open, his ears flicking at the faint, rustling sound outside. The warmth of the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, and the room was quiet except for the soft breathing of the baby, bundled tightly on the couch. The man stirred in his chair, groaning softly as he stretched. His eyes met Hunter's, and he offered a small, weary smile. "Morning, buddy. Seems like we made it through the night." Hunter didn't move from his spot, his body still curled protectively near the baby. The scent of the man, the baby, and the faint traces of smoke from the dying fire filled the air. For the first time in days, Hunter's senses weren't overwhelmed by danger or fear. Yet as he sniffed the faint breeze coming through the gaps in the walls, his body tensed. Something was out there. The man noticed Hunter's sudden alertness, his ears now standing upright and his eyes locked on the cabin door. "What is it?" he asked quietly, rising from his chair. He moved to the window, peering out into the clearing. At first, he saw nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the wind, their branches casting long shadows on the frosted ground. Then he spotted it, movement in the distance, a shape darting between the trees, quick and low to the ground. The man's heart quickened. "Hunter," he whispered, his voice tense. The dog's low growl confirmed his suspicions. The shape emerged from the tree line, followed by another, and then a third. Wolves. Their sleek bodies moved with eerie coordination, their noses pointed toward the cabin. Hunter rose to his feet, his muscles taut as he positioned himself between the door and the baby. The man stepped back from the window, his mind racing. He grabbed a piece of firewood from the pile near the hearth, gripping it tightly as he looked at Hunter. "Looks like we've got company," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Stay close." The wolves circled the clearing, their sharp eyes scanning the cabin. They moved with the precision of predators, their hunger evident in the way their tongues flicked over their teeth. One of them let out a low guttural growl, and the others followed suit, their snarls reverberating through the quiet morning air. Hunter growled back, his teeth bared as he took a step forward. The man placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Easy, boy. Let's not rush into this." The baby whimpered softly, breaking the tension in the room for a brief moment. Hunter glanced back, his protective instincts flaring. He let out a sharp bark, a warning that seemed to echo through the cabin and beyond. The wolves froze, their ears twitching at the sound. The man took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. He couldn't let the wolves get too close, not with the baby and Hunter both in vulnerable states. He knelt by the fire, grabbing a half-burned log and blowing on the embers until they flared to life. The sudden burst of light and smoke caused the wolves to hesitate, their movements faltering as they watched the cabin intently. "I've got an idea," the man muttered, glancing at Hunter. "But you're going to need to hold them off if this doesn't work." Hunter didn't look away from the door, his growl deep and unyielding. The man grabbed a tin can from the kitchen shelf and tossed in a handful of nails and screws. The clattering sound was loud and jarring. He placed it in the fire, the metal heating rapidly as sparks began to pop and crackle. Outside, the wolves inched closer, their hunger driving them toward the cabin. The man's heart pounded, but he kept his focus on the fire. Once the can was hot enough, he grabbed it with a thick rag and pushed open the cabin door. The wolves stopped, their eyes trained on the man as he stepped outside, the hot can clutched in his hands. He took a deep breath and threw it into the clearing. The can hit the ground with a metallic clang, and then a sharp explosion of sound, like a shotgun blast, shattered the silence. The wolves shrieked in surprise, scattering in every direction. The man turned back to Hunter, his chest heaving with effort. "That ought to do it," he said, his voice laced with relief. Hunter's growl subsided, and his tense posture relaxed. The wolves were gone. Inside the cabin, the baby continued to sleep soundly, unaware of the danger that had passed. Hunter's eyes never left the door, his ears still twitching for any further sign of danger. The man stepped back inside, closing the door with a soft click. He exhaled slowly, his body finally relaxing. He looked at Hunter, offering a tired smile. "We made it," he said quietly. Hunter gave a low, contented grunt, his eyes drifting back to the baby as the warmth of the fire filled the cabin. It had been a long, hard fight, but they had survived, and for now, that was enough. Then, a figure emerged from the underbrush. It wasn't a predator, but a woman, disheveled and breathless, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. She froze when she saw them, her gaze darting from the man to the dog, and finally to the baby. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not here to hurt you. I saw the smoke from your cabin and thought maybe someone could help me." Hunter's growls softened, but his posture remained guarded. The man lowered the wrench slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. She looked exhausted, her clothes torn and dirty. But there was something sincere in her expression, a desperation that mirrored his own. "What do you need?" he asked cautiously. The woman glanced back over her shoulder, her body trembling. "There's something out there. I've been running all night. Please, I just need a safe place to rest." Hunter stepped closer to the man, his nose brushing against his leg. The man sighed, glancing down at the baby. "All right," he said finally. "But if you try anything—" "I won't," she interrupted, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I promise." The man nodded, motioning for her to follow. As they continued down the path, Hunter stayed close, his eyes never leaving the stranger. The man's thoughts raced, uncertainty gnawing at him. He didn't trust her completely, but for now, they had no choice but to move forward together. The group pressed on through the forest, an uneasy silence hanging in the air. Hunter walked close to the man, his powerful frame shielding the baby, while his sharp eyes flicked toward the woman every so often. She stayed a few paces behind, her movements careful as though she didn't want to alarm the dog. The man broke the silence first. "What's your name?" "Leah," she answered quietly, glancing at him before looking down at her feet. "I was hiking with a group, but we got separated." Her voice trailed off, her eyes darting nervously toward the dense trees around them. "Something was chasing me." Hunter's ears perked up at her words, his gaze sweeping the forest as though confirming her story. "What kind of something?" the man pressed, his tone sharp. "I don't know," Leah admitted, shaking her head. "I didn't see it clearly, just eyes in the dark and the sounds. It was fast, and it didn't stop." Her voice trembled, and she crossed her arms as though trying to ward off the memory. The man exchanged a glance with Hunter, who gave a soft owl as if in agreement. He adjusted the baby in its sling, his protective instincts flaring stronger. "We'll deal with it if it comes back," he said, his voice firm. "But right now, we keep moving." Leah nodded, quickening her pace to match theirs. As the morning wore on, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, and their canopy denser, blotting out much of the sunlight. The path was uneven, with gnarled roots and jagged rocks forcing them to tread carefully. Every sound, the crackle of branches, the distant chirp of birds, felt amplified, adding to the tension. Hunter suddenly stopped, his body stiffening. A deep, guttural growl rumbled in his throat as he stared into the shadows ahead. The man froze, his hand tightening around the wrench. "What is it?" he whispered. Leah's eyes widened, and she clutched a tree trunk for support. "Is it them?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then came a low, eerie howl, followed by another. The sound echoed, growing closer with each repetition. Hunter's growl deepened, and his fur bristled. The man's heart pounded. "Leah, stay close to me," he ordered, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. Hunter stepped forward, his stance fierce and unyielding. From the shadows, a pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared, followed by another and another. Wolves. Their sleek forms emerged from the trees, muscles rippling under their thick coats. They moved with predatory grace, their eyes locked on the group. The man raised the wrench, his jaw clenched. "We don't want trouble," he muttered, knowing his words meant nothing to the animals. He glanced down at the baby, then at Hunter. "Protect them." Hunter didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between the wolves and the others. His growl was low and menacing, his teeth bared in a warning. The lead wolf, larger than the others, snarled in response, its hackles raised. The man crouched low, his free arm extending to shield Leah. "If they rush us, run," he told her, his voice tight. "I'll hold them off." Leah shook her head vehemently. "I'm not leaving you." The wolves advanced slowly, their movements calculated. The lead wolf lunged first, snapping its jaws mere inches from Hunter's face. The dog reacted instantly, meeting the wolf head-on with a powerful strike of his paw. The two animals clashed, snarling and snapping, their growls filling the forest. The other wolves hesitated for a moment before circling, their sharp eyes assessing the man and Leah. One darted forward, aiming for the baby, but the man swung the wrench with all his strength. The metal connected with a sickening crack, sending the wolf yelping back into the shadows. Hunter fought fiercely, his powerful jaws locking onto the lead wolf's shoulder. The two animals rolled, a blur of fur and teeth, as the other wolves flanked him. Despite his exhaustion, Hunter moved with precision, his strikes calculated and devastating. The man swung the wrench again, narrowly missing another wolf. "Leah, take the baby," he shouted, thrusting the sling toward her. "What?" she gasped, her face pale with fear. "Take it and go." "I'll hold them off." Leah hesitated, but the urgency in his voice left no room for argument. She grabbed the sling, cradling the baby protectively against her chest. "I'll wait for you," she cried, tears streaming down her face as she stumbled backward. Hunter, now battling two wolves at once, let out a fierce bark, his determination unyielding. The man stepped forward, positioning himself beside the dog. "You're not doing this alone, buddy," he muttered. Together they fought back, their movements synchronized as though they had been partners for years. The wolves snarled and snapped, their numbers giving them an advantage, but Hunter and the man held their ground. Blow by blow, they forced the pack to retreat, their growls turning to whimpers as they disappeared back into the trees. The forest fell silent again, save for the ragged breaths of man and dog. Hunter's body trembled with exhaustion, fresh scratches marring his coat. The man knelt beside him, his hand resting on the dog's heaving side. "You did it, boy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Hunter licked his hand once, a gesture of gratitude and camaraderie. Leah appeared from the shadows, the baby still cradled in her arms. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're fine," the man said, though his body ached with every movement. "Thanks to him." Hunter nudged the man gently, his eyes scanning the forest one last time before relaxing. The wolves were gone for now, but the danger was far from over. "We need to move," the man said, pushing himself to his feet. "This place isn't safe anymore." Leah nodded, her grip on the baby tightening. Together they began to walk, Hunter limping slightly, but determined to stay at the man's side. The bond between them had deepened, forged in the fire of survival. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Night had fallen completely, cloaking the forest in an impenetrable darkness, broken only by the faint shimmer of starlight filtering through the branches. Hunter moved cautiously, his breaths labored but resolute. The baby, snugly wrapped in the blanket, slept peacefully. Clara and the ranger followed closely behind, their flashlights casting weak beams that illuminated the uneven path ahead. Every step felt heavier with fatigue mounting, and the biting chill growing ever sharper. Hunter slowed his pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure the group stayed together. Clara noticed how the dog's head remained high, muscles coiled like taut wires. "He's tracking something," she whispered to the ranger. "Maybe he's found another trail." Suddenly, Hunter froze. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his ears standing at full attention. Clara and the ranger stopped in their tracks, scanning the dark forest around them. "Something's out there," the ranger said, gripping his flashlight tightly and searching for movement among the shadows. A sharp crack pierced the silence, the sound of a snapping branch, followed by rustling in the bushes. Hunter crouched low, his growl deepening as a warning. Clara clutched the baby closer, her heart pounding. Could it be another animal, she murmured, trying to calm herself. But when a shadowy figure stepped out from the thicket, their fears took shape. It was a man, his face obscured by a tattered hood, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket. His eyes were cold and calculating, his mouth curling into a menacing grin. "Lost in the woods, are we?" he said, his voice sending chills down their spines. The ranger stepped forward, raising his flashlight to get a better look at the stranger's face. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he demanded, his voice steady but guarded. The man took a step closer, ignoring the question. It's not every day you come across such a well-trained dog and an abandoned baby. Seems like you've got something that might interest me. Hunter's growl grew louder as he positioned himself firmly in front of Clara and the child, his body a living shield. The ranger quickly assessed the threat and prepared to act. "We don't know who you are, but we're not looking for trouble," he said firmly. The stranger chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "You don't get to decide whether there's trouble," he replied, gesturing behind him. Two more figures emerged from the darkness, both armed with knives and wearing equally unsettling expressions. Clara held her breath, clutching the baby protectively. The ranger stepped closer to Hunter, ready for whatever was about to happen. "We're not looking for a fight," he said, keeping his voice calm. But the tension in the air was thick, and a confrontation seemed inevitable. Hunter didn't wait for them to make the first move. With a sudden, explosive leap, he lunged at the nearest man. Hunter's sudden attack was a blur of movement, his powerful body colliding with the first man, knocking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The man let out a startled yell as Hunter's jaws clamped down on his forearm, forcing him to drop his knife. The other two men reacted quickly. One lunged toward Hunter with his knife raised, while the other made a move toward Clara and the baby. The ranger stepped forward, intercepting the second man with a forceful shove, causing him to stumble backward into a tree. "Stay back," the ranger shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. Hunter, meanwhile, shifted his position to avoid the swipe of the knife from the third man. The blade narrowly missed him, slicing through the air just above his head. With a deep, guttural growl, Hunter launched himself again, his teeth bared and his strength unwavering. Despite his exhaustion, his ferocity seemed to catch the attackers off guard, their initial confidence giving way to hesitation. Clara, clutching the baby tightly, backed away toward the nearest tree, her heart racing as she tried to shield the child from the chaos. She could hear the sounds of the scuffle, the sharp growls, the grunts of effort, and the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. She glanced toward the ranger, who was grappling with one of the men, using every ounce of strength to keep him at bay. Hunter's relentless attacks began to turn the tide. The man he had first tackled was now on his knees, clutching his injured arm and retreating slowly into the shadows. The second attacker, visibly shaken, hesitated as he watched the dog overpower his companion. "You're going to regret this," the third man snarled, his knife trembling slightly in his grip as he faced Hunter. But before he could make another move, Hunter lunged again, his jaws snapping dangerously close to the man's leg, forcing him to drop the weapon in panic. The ranger took advantage of the distraction, delivering a solid punch to the man he was fighting, sending him sprawling onto the forest floor. Breathing heavily, the ranger turned toward Clara. "Are you okay?" he called out, his voice edged with concern. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face as she cradled the baby. "We're okay," she managed to say, her voice trembling. With two of the attackers now retreating into the woods and the third incapacitated, the immediate danger seemed to subside. Hunter stood tall, his chest heaving as he watched the remaining threats disappear into the darkness. His fur was matted with dirt, and his muscles quivered from the effort, but his unwavering determination had carried them through. The ranger moved to Hunter's side, placing a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "You saved us," he said, his voice filled with gratitude and admiration. Hunter let out a low whine, his eyes briefly meeting Clara's before shifting back to the forest. His ears were still perked and alert. Even in victory, he remained vigilant, ready to defend his newfound family against any further threats. As the forest fell into an uneasy silence, Clara clutched the baby tightly, her heart racing from the encounter. The ranger knelt beside Hunter, inspecting the dog's wounds. Though shallow, they were a testament to the battle he had fought to protect them. "You're one tough dog," the ranger murmured, patting Hunter gently. The victory was short-lived, as a new sound emerged from the darkness. It started faintly, branches snapping, leaves crunching, and grew louder with each passing second. A chilling howl echoed through the trees, followed by another and another. Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Wolves," the ranger said grimly, his voice low but urgent. "The pack. And they're close." Hunter's ears shot up, and he let out a deep, warning growl, his body tensing. Exhaustion momentarily forgotten, he stepped in front of Clara and the baby. The ranger retrieved his flashlight, its beam sweeping across the trees. Yellow eyes glinted in the distance, the wolves already circling. "We need to move now," the ranger urged, his voice steady despite the growing tension. But moving wasn't an option. Clara was frozen with fear, the baby stirring restlessly in her arms. Hunter positioned himself firmly between them and the approaching pack, his stance resolute. The wolves emerged from the shadows, their sleek forms moving with predatory grace. Their leader, larger than the rest, bared its teeth and let out a low growl, signaling its intent. The ranger picked up a sturdy branch and brandished it as a makeshift weapon. "Stay behind me," he instructed Clara, though he knew the odds were stacked against them. Hunter's growl deepened as the wolves advanced, and then, with a blur of motion, Hunter leapt forward. Retreating, melting back into the shadows from which they came, Hunter stood still. His chest heaving as he watched the wolves disappear, the adrenaline began to fade, and his body trembled with exhaustion. Clara rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Hunter, you saved us again," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The ranger placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "We need to get him to safety. He's hurt, but he's a fighter. He'll make it." Hunter let out a soft whine, his head resting against Clara's arm. Despite his injuries, there was a quiet pride in his eyes, a reflection of the bond he had forged with this fragile group. The baby stirred in Clara's arms, its tiny hand brushing against the hunter's fur as if offering its own thanks. The group pressed on, the cabin now only a short distance away. Hunter limped but stayed alert, his senses attuned to any lingering dangers. When they finally reached the small structure, relief washed over them. The walls, though worn and weathered, promised a sanctuary, a place to finally rest. Inside, Clara laid the baby gently on a pile of blankets while the ranger tended to Hunter's wounds. "You're incredible," the ranger said softly, cleaning a gash on Hunter's side. "I've never seen a dog with such courage." Hunter closed his eyes, his body relaxing for the first time since the journey began. Clara sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his fur. "You're not just a hero, Hunter," she whispered. "You're family." As dawn broke over the forest, golden light filtered through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls. Clara woke to the gentle sound of birdsong and the soft cooing of the baby. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace. She looked over at Hunter, lying near the baby, his chest rising and falling steadily. Despite the exhaustion etched into his body, there was a calmness about him, a quiet victory in his amber eyes. The ranger entered the cabin carrying a small first aid kit and a fresh blanket. "How's our hero?" he asked, nodding toward Hunter. Clara smiled faintly. "Tired, but still standing. He's incredible." Hunter perked up slightly at their voices, his ears twitching as he shifted his gaze between them. The ranger knelt beside him, carefully checking the bandages he'd applied the night before. "You've earned your rest, big guy," he murmured, scratching behind Hunter's ear. Clara cradled the baby, who gurgled softly, its tiny hand reaching out. She brought the child closer to Hunter, letting it touch the dog's fur. "We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. Hunter responded with a gentle huff, his tail wagging faintly against the floor. By mid-morning, the sound of vehicles in the distance broke the forest stillness. Clara's heart quickened as she heard voices calling out. "Search and rescue!" someone shouted, their tone urgent. The ranger stepped outside, waving toward the team of rescuers approaching the cabin. They arrived in a flurry of activity, their radios crackling and boots crunching against the dirt. One of the medics rushed to Clara, checking her and the baby. "You're safe now," the medic assured her. "We'll get you both taken care of." Clara held on to the baby tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We're okay because of him," she said, motioning to Hunter. The rescuers turned their attention to the dog, their expressions shifting to awe. "This dog protected you out here?" one asked, kneeling to examine Hunter. The ranger nodded, recounting the harrowing encounters with the wolves and the journey through the forest. As the medics prepared to transport Clara and the baby, she hesitated, looking down at Hunter. "What about him?" she asked. "He has to come with us." One of the rescuers smiled. "Don't worry, he's coming with us. A dog like this deserves a hero's welcome." Back in the safety of civilization, Hunter's story quickly spread. News outlets and social media lit up with tales of the calm, savage stray who had risked everything to protect a helpless child. Donations poured in for his care, and people from all over expressed their gratitude and admiration. At the veterinary clinic, Hunter received the treatment he needed. Though his body bore scars from his past life and the recent battles, his spirit remained unbroken. Clara visited him every day, the baby always in tow. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment. A week later, Clara stood outside the clinic, nervously fidgeting with her hands. When the doors opened, Hunter trotted out, his tail wagging enthusiastically. His wounds had healed, and his once weary eyes now shone with vitality. Clara knelt, throwing her arms around him. "You're coming home with us," she whispered. Hunter settled into his new life with Clara and the baby. Gone were the days of wandering aimlessly through the forest, driven by hunger and survival. Now he had a family, a purpose. His once guarded heart softened, filled with the warmth of love and belonging. Clara often watched in amazement as Hunter and the baby played together. The child would giggle as Hunter gently nudged toys toward it or allowed tiny hands to tug on his ears. "You're more than just a protector," she'd say to him. "You're family." One sunny afternoon, Clara sat on the porch, the baby in her lap as Hunter lay nearby, basking in the warmth. She reached over, running her hand through his fur. "You saved us in every way," she said softly. Hunter turned his head, his gaze meeting hers with a look of understanding. Hunter's story became a symbol of resilience and loyalty. The town celebrated him as a local hero, even holding a small ceremony in his honor. But for Clara and the baby, he was much more than that. He was their guardian, their companion, and a constant reminder of the power of love. As the years went by, the bond between them only deepened. Hunter aged gracefully. His once powerful frame slowed, but never lost its strength of spirit. On quiet evenings, Clara would sit with him, reminiscing about their incredible journey. And when the baby, now a toddler, would fall asleep nestled against Hunter's side, Clara would smile, knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be, together as a family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more incredible tales of resilience, love, and loyalty. And as always, thank you for being part of our story.